I did a video on Pokemon that need to be nerfed in Unite. Now let's talk about Pokemon that need a buff. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to leave a like, share with your friends, and comment down below. But let's get straight into this one with Gengar. Now, Gengar is one of only 2 Pokemon I put in the bottom tier for Pokemon Unite. And bottom tier isn't even like D tier, F tier, or completely unplayable. It's C tier. It's just not as good as everything else. And when it comes to Pokemon Unite, that can kind of be a problem because Pokemon Unite, everything feels pretty strong, and like Gengar and Venusaur can still be pretty impactful inside of games, but when you like look at Gengar's stats, it gets kind of weird. It's a melee speedster. And just like seeing melee there for Gengar brings up like weird Gen 1 vibes where Ghost was counted as physical, just in moves, because that's how Pokemon was in the early days. But when you look at it, yeah, it has like middle-high offense, which is where a speedster should lie, because it looks like they're trying to build it like speedsters. They're just dancing around the fight, dishing out little bits of damage, but it kind of stacks up, and it kind of turns into a soft carry performance. But then Pokemon like Absol exist. So really, there's no reason of picking Gengar over Absol because Absol has insane mobility inside of fights like a speedster should, but just ends up doing more damage because its damage is overtuned for what a speedster should be. I mean, the official damage rating from the developers puts Absol at the same amount of damage as Gengar. That's just wrong. So we can see it's like, yeah, Gengar to kind of either catch up with speedsters, or if Absol gets nerfed and maybe Talonflame gets a touch of nerf as well, then there's actually a reason to picking Gengar instead of one of the other two, so we can go more into the abilities and what kind of needs adjusting. I think Levitate is good, but the problem is, since Gengar underperforms compared to other speedsters and even junglers, like you throw Lucario in the jungler, or Garchomp, they just get to have much more effective ganks than the Gengar. So Gengar gets to move around and be pretty speedy, but I haven't really seen this apply to make it where it's like, oh, Gengar as a Levitate speedster is going to be backdooring and doing crazy stuff. I've seen Talonflame backdoor more because its abilities are really overtuned for that movement, and then if you want damage, you pick Absol instead. So that's kind of thing. Early game, I feel like Will-O-Wisp Lick, it's fine, but Shadow Ball just does not do enough damage. Shadow Ball definitely needs some more. That way, at least like if you're poking, it's going to be significant on the poke, and then maybe you land 1 or 2 Shadow Balls, you go in on that second one, and now you actually have some execute potential or the ability to assassinate an opponent. Now, I feel like Sludge Bomb is pretty weak, and like Sludge Bomb Hex, didn't really feel it being that effective when I was playing Pokemon Unite. Dream Eater, pretty crazy though. Like you just land it and then you jump to someone, and then that's where you like start stealing hit points and doing damage and then healing and all these other things. But the problem is, like, when Gengar gets in, if Gengar lands all of its moves and gets to do some cool stuff, it's not a threat. Like, whenever Gengar rolled up into a fight, I wasn't like, oh man, it's Gengar, the fight's over. No, like, Gengar could land its abilities on me, hit things, and I'm just like, I just feel like I'm putting out more damage and more pressure on the opponent. Theme-wise, Gengar does really well. It feels like you have this annoying shadow on you that's trying to kill you, but the thing is, it can't actually kill you. So you can just turn around or have like a support or a defensive Pokemon CC Gengar, and that's just going to have a really bad time. Also, when Gengar pops its Unite move, it isn't like, oh man, Gengar's going to pop up and destroy me. It's like, Gengar went invisible. Whatever, just focus the rest of the team. So I think like Gengar needs damage numbers. But if there's one thing we've learned from League of Legends, that if you just give too much of a damage buff to something, then it's super out of control. So I don't know. I didn't play enough Gengar, and I didn't play against or with enough Gengar to like know exactly what to do with this Pokemon. But overall, it just feels kind of weak in every regard. But I feel like if you buff it in every regard, then you have something that's way too silly. So I think it comes down to when Timmy Studios kind of reins in on what a speedster is supposed to be. Is it supposed to be high mobility, soft assassination in fights? Or is it actually just supposed to be like, no, these things don't have damage. They're just kind of like support damaging and just like picking around the entire fight and whittling down players. Absol doesn't do that. Talonflame doesn't do that. That's where Gengar is, but Gengar's weak because I guess it's what a speedster's supposed to be. And I didn't play the Canadian beta, so I don't know what Zeraora is up to. If Zeraora was just way more damage than Gengar and kind of like competitive with Absol in that way, then yeah, it's either a problem with the class or Gengar just really needs some heavy adjustment reworking already this early in the game, so that way it can at least be viable, but just doesn't really feel that super viable. Next up, let's talk about the other low tier character, quote-unquote low tier. Like, pretty much, like, when it comes to Pokemon Unite, there's high tier, top tier, and then, like, just Venusaur and Gengar kind of in mid-ish by comparison. Venusaur is weird. It does have a very high offensive rating, and it feels like it can carry and can do high amounts of damage in certain situations, but for the most part, it just doesn't really happen. That if you go Giga Drain, Solar Beam, and you land both those, and you get like both ticks of Solar Beam, and then a Giga Drain, and then you hit someone with Verdant Anger, that might not be enough to kill them. But you should be like comboing down fools, and like the range on Solar Beam is crazy, and you got like good amounts of poke and stuff. So like it should work for the Venusaur, but it doesn't. And I feel like Sludge Bomb plus Petal Dance, not enough damage. So I think maybe the trick to Venusaur is that's actually supposed to be getting in a lot of auto attack damage. Like that third hit procs, and it does really well. But then Venusaur is kind of having some identity issues where it's very frail. Like you think about Venusaur in the main series, and if you're playing that thing in singles, you're just going to be a tank. And then like Mega Venusaur was a mega tank. But no, this is actually a mage. This is a carry champion, so it's not supposed to have a high amount of endurance. I think what it needs is just more endurance and maybe like a touch dialed back on the damage numbers. That way you're just not a burst tank or something that shouldn't exist. But then it can kind of put more focus onto threading in those auto attacks and making it to where like you're a hybrid carry and that you want to be landing abilities, but you also want to be in the fray, getting those hits off with your auto attacks. Probably a really big one would be increasing the healing off of Giga Drain. That way you actually have very effective trading when you just start getting in and dueling with people. So I think Giga Drain can use more damage and more percent healing, and then Petal Dance should maybe give you defenses while it's active. So that way you're not directly like buffing Venusaur's tankiness and creating a problem, but if you want to go for that, you want to give up the damage on Solar Beam and become a duelist under Petal Dance, then that's pretty good, and then maybe keep the auto attacks where they are, because they are pretty powerful. But I don't want them to be too powerful, but that could also just kind of like warp the playstyle. So there's like 3 different ways of playing Venusaur, and maybe all of them could just get lifted up by a little bit of adjustment. Now this is where it gets tricky when saying some Pokemon need a buff. I feel like Charizard is in a very good place at B tier, and that the crit auto-attacking Charizard build is just way too strong when Charizard is in its Unite move. So if we're supposed to like buff everything else about Charizard, its Unite move needs a heavy nerf. Like it can't be able to fly around and do that much damage for as long as it does, but then also all of its other abilities are pretty weak. So I don't even know if this counts as one of my top 5. I just want to talk about Charizard for a bit. Because yeah, like Flamethrower and Fire Punch don't really do enough damage. Fire Blast and Flare Blitz don't really feel like they do enough damage. And Charizard just like isn't popping off super hard until it gets its Unite move, and then it's just untargetable over the battlefield, and that's what's making it so strong. So that's where you can play around the auto attack. So I mean, maybe just like buffing special based Charizard and reducing the amount of damage or crit scaling, because it's like a persistent AoE Fire Breath thing on Charizard could lead to some balance on it. But overall, when I was making this video, I had just a straightforward idea. And Slowbro, I feel, needs a buff. Mostly Slowpoke. Like, and maybe also just clarity overall, because no one really knows what Oblivious does. When I played Slowbro and I was fighting people, even I didn't understand what was going on. It's like, okay, the hit point loss is gradual, and then I need to land abilities to get some of those hit points back. That made sense, but it just happened at like random intervals. Like sometimes I'd just be walking around and I'd heal, even though I hadn't cast an ability. Or I'd cast an ability, and sometimes I'd get some health back instantly, and I'd wait a bit, and I'd get some more health back after casting the ability. A lot of stuff was just kind of weird there, so I think there might be too much going on with this passive. Also, just Slowpoke is way too weak. Like, it's just really easy to bully the Slowpoke. It doesn't have enough like durability. Its passive doesn't like proc as much, and then like Slack Off, it's really close to Snorlax, but you're just better off running Snorlax. And then Water Gun's just weak. Shoots water that displaces and slows opponents, stunning them when pushed all the way back. But it's like a kind of weird charge up, and you still have to target it right. So I mean, like, there isn't a lot of clarity in how Slowbro actually works, or how Slowpoke is actually doing things. And then, like, it actually scales into a pretty powerful Pokemon. Surf is crazy. Summon and ride a wave of water that damages places opponents in its path. So, like, you actually have mobility on a tank to get in and then, like, land a Slow Beam or land a Telekinesis and then, like, do crazy things. And it does a lot of damage. Like, AP Slowbro can combo into things and just set up for some craziness, but then that's it. That's your only truly hard damaging ability, or at least your only damaging ability that's like a regular ability. So you just like come in, you do that, and then if they walk out of the surf, Slowbro's impactfulness in the fight kind of goes away. Now if you telekinesis like right after the surf and you catch them in it, yeah, it's pretty crazy. But the problem is like Slowbro is only locking down one Pokemon throughout the fight. And you can get knocked out of the telekinesis really easily. Now Slow Beam, that's where it gets crazy, because Slowbro is unstoppable and gains a shield while using Slow Beam, while hitting an opponent and while draining them and doing all that stuff. But the thing is, it's only one lockdown. So, Slowbro, I guess it could be balancing, like, can work in its current states where it just kind of turns the game into a 4v4 while just holding someone down, but I don't think it's tanky enough to get away with that. So maybe while using telekinesis, it should get extra defenses. Maybe the upgrade shouldn't be increased range and faster activation, but just unstoppability. Or maybe like a shield that blocks one attack when you first use it or something. Because other than that, it's like Slowbro has to stand there. Slowbro has to stand there, not really doing damage, it's kind of holding someone down. So I think the big problem is, with everything else that's going on in the game, just Slowbro doesn't feel like that much of a threat. You just try not to look like too delicious of a telekinesis target, and then you can go and just ruin the rest of his team in a 4v4 or something. Also, Amnesia, don't really see any reason picking it, because telekinesis is so good. Like, there's a lot of so good stuff in Slowbro, but just the rest of Slowbro, either it's like base stats or other things going on with it, don't really make it fit too well. Now, I do think it's cool. When I was playing Slowbro, I felt theme. I felt like I was just some oblivious dude wandering through the game, just ruining other people's experience. That doesn't feel like you can win games or be crazy too impactful with that. So I'd rather just pick a higher impact tank like Snorlax. So those are kind of some problems that you run into. Amnesia, recovering hit points and increasing special attack. I don't know like what's needed to, like, maybe you just increase special attack without the upgrade, and then the upgrade just increases the special attack further. So that way it's like, oh, if you pick Amnesia and go into Surf, you can actually have some pretty good impactfulness. Its auto attack also doesn't feel too crazy satisfying, so yeah, it's like, Slowbro's just kind of there. I guess it could use just more durability in the early game, and maybe that just helps it scale just like a little bit better in late, so it feels more impactful. But overall, it's like Slowbro's good, and has definitely frustrated me, but it's not like Slowbro has ever taken over a game too much. So I think, like, when you're comparing it to the rest of the roster, yeah, could use a buff in some way. I said this in my last video, but since we don't, like, have all the base stats and how all the damage interactions work and calculations and stuff, we can't just look up a table and be like, oh, Surf just got a 0.1 more scaling, and, you know, this got a little bit of a buff here. Like, we can't tweak the numbers, so just kind of, like, feel. But overall, it's like, yeah, Slowbro doesn't feel like it really has too much of an impact inside the games. Next up for buffs, I'm going to say Cramorant. Yes, I did put it at S tier in my tier list video, and that's mostly from just like absurd lane dominance and its ability to just heavily impact teamfights with Hurricane and its Unite move. But the thing is, no one else respects Cramorant. A lot of people put it at low tier. So if the devs are like, oh wow, Cramorant was like underplayed and had a low win rate except for like 1 or 2 dudes out there that were just maining Cramorant, so maybe we'll let that slide. You know, like if everyone just underestimates Cramorant so hard and just thinks it's a bad character so much that it gets a buff, oh yeah, I'm happy. I think its auto attacks are also like really weak. There's really no feel from Cramorant's auto attacks. Even with the Gulp Missile passive, it still feels really weak. Like I'm getting like maybe 15-20% more damage on my already whatever auto attack. So it's not like I prep a third auto, so I have my like a Pikachu in my mouth, or I have a Arrokuda in my mouth. So I hit them with that, I combo up, I catch another one with Surf, and I throw that at them, and then I'm like actually getting meaningful usefulness out of my passive. I don't really feel like that's ever happened. Like the passive doesn't really change the fight. It's mostly Hurricane, Surf, kiting, Hurricane, Surf, and then like everyone's dead. And then you ult, and then you just kind of keep securing everything. So passive and auto attacks could feel a lot better on the Cramorant. Feather Dance just doesn't really exist. Like I use it maybe once, and then and then it levels up at level 4, and then I don't see it again. So I don't know, something other than Feather Dance. This hindrance doesn't really do anything. It also doesn't make sense. Because normally, like a hindrance or a buff or some kind of like move will keep that move as it level ups. No, then Cramorant just goes into all damage. Maybe just give it Air Cutter so that way you have like a little bit of extra Kasha for damage in an early fight, or maybe to like try to poke steal something. Even though Whirlpool is insane. Whirlpool is like 3 abilities worth of damage in the early game. Yeah, I don't know what to say except for maybe just like buffing the base stats for Cramorant and some of the scaling, because like Surf's already high damage, Hurricane is already high damage. I don't like Air Slash or Dive, but I feel like there is a playstyle there. It's just not as good as like actually having the skill to land Hurricane and Surf. So this is mostly just me hoping that everyone thinks Cramorant sucks. It gets some kind of just little bit of tuning, little bit of buff to just kind of nudge it in a better direction. But since I'm already maining and stomping with it, that means I get about a week and a half, 2 weeks before it gets hard nerfed into the ground, where I can make it to maybe Plat, maybe Diamond. And then maybe it gets punted so hard it's just never viable again, but at least I got to really enjoy Cramorant for a while. Also, again, yeah, when you look at this, like all the suggestions are just as a mage. So maybe that's why people feel that Cramorant is bad because, like, oh, I want to be auto-attacking with Gulpness. No, you don't. Your auto-attacks mean nothing. You're not an 80 carry. You feel like an 80 carry, but you're not an 80 carry at all. You're just a caster. You're a mage. So maybe when people realize that, Cramorant's going to get a lot stronger, because that's what playstyle really unlocked Cramorant for me. But this is purely on the list for greed, because, like, yeah, it needs a buff, and I'm going to run away with that buff, and I'm going to love it until the Pokemon is unplayable. And that brings us to the last Pokemon that could use a buff, and that's like the crazy thing. There's 19 Pokemon on the roster, 5 getting nerf, 5 getting buff, and I think everything's in a pretty healthy state. And I'm kind of scared when I say this one, but Mr. Mime. Now, we can't talk about like Machamp a bit. I think Machamp when it ults is just absurd, and in certain compositions or against certain compositions, Machamp is like uber powerful with what it can do. Like, if it can just run up onto you, you're having a bad time. And if it can get away with running up onto you and then ulting and running into like 3 of your other teammates, yeah, it can actually change fights. It can impact the game. And it's a really good anti-split pusher or an anti-roamer. If it catches you out, it's over. So I think Machamp is in a healthy place. Maybe like a slight buff somehow, but it already has like so much overtune in its kit because immune to hindrances and then also unstoppable. Yeah, becomes unstoppable. So I mean, like, that's really all the crazy stuff that Machamp needs. Like, slight more damage, but it kind of doesn't need that because it's already bursting you down. Maybe just like whatever increment of base speed. In League of Legends, it's like 5 base speed. I'm guessing in Pokemon Unite, it's probably close to like 10, 15. Just give it like 15 base speed. Done. Machamp's buffed. But Mr. Mime, the way I see it is that when I say Mr. Mime needs a buff, Mr. Mime mains feel like how I feel when I say Cramorant needs a buff. That we've already taken this kind of look down on character and made it stupid gross. And we can do some really powerful things with it. But because it's overlooked, if it gets a buff, then that just makes it even more insane. So maybe the 5 people that are like God tier S+ on Mr. Mime getting a buff isn't the worst thing, even though I think that makes them truly unstoppable. But overall, it's like, yeah, Mr. Mime needs something. Even though much like Machamp, a lot of its kit has good synergy, but it's an incredibly high skill cap. It's more than intermediate to make sure you're getting the perfect barrier setups and you're getting the perfect pushes with your confusion and like all these other things. And I think the ultimate is where a lot of people don't understand what Mr. Mime is doing. Like Showtime, you're supposed to just run in, tag everyone with it, and just shut down a fight. And it's already really good at that. So I don't know, like maybe increasing the duration of Showtime just a little bit and adding a little bit more stun at the end, like another micro stun when it finishes. I think that'd actually be pretty cool. And it means Mr. Mime gets to be more impactful. Since you only have 1 damaging ability and you're a melee that's trying to get knockups, it makes it hard to like really get in and start to like feel like you have a heavy influence in fight. So I'm thinking that for the auto attacks, give Mr. Mime slightly more auto attack speed and slightly more range on that auto attack, so you can at least more reliably get a knockup with it. And then you're feeling like you're doing something cool. And then that, if you're getting more auto attacks, it's slightly more damage conversion, just more base damage on confusion and psychic. I've heard some weird things about guard swap. Maybe there's some memes there with the guard swap, but I feel like just god tier barrier play into knockups and confusion pushes and then CC botting on Showtime is where Mr. Mime is super strong. And I think it's already good with Filter, where it's like you just increase defense after using moves and then you become a tanky support that's allowed to run around and then get all of these abilities off and get all of the CC off. So I think like Mr. Mime synergizes into itself, but needs something that gives it more consistent impactfulness for 99.9% of players. Also, I wasn't paying super amounts of attention, but I don't think Confusion does more damage when an opponent hits a wall. Like, it stuns them when that happens, which is crazy, but I think that it should also maybe do like 50% more of its damage, so that way you're actually rewarded for a high skill play, and it's also punishing an opponent. If your opponent is just kind of set up to get barrier confusioned, well, that's kind of on them too, for like not respecting the Mr. Mime and kind of falling into its zone of influence and into Mr. Mime's trap. So I think that that would actually be pretty fair and then make Mr. Mime a bit more of a threat, where it's like, all right, yeah, this is already the thing that the Mr. Mime mains are doing and being incredibly successful with anyways, so they'll just feel a little better off of that, but it also makes it to where Mr. Mime does better overall, even if like an average player gets one of those off in a fight. Yeah, there we go. That could have a bit more of an impact while not completely dominating the game, while, like, when Garchomp ults and can 1v5 or something. So I honestly think Mr. Mime is in a really good spot right now, and then, like, you get absurd amounts of reward for having a very high skill cap on the Pokemon, but everything else is just so overtuned, or some, like, little bit of extra weirdness in its kits where it's hard to feel truly impactful on Mr. Mime. Like, if Pikachu gets a nerf, if Ninetales CC gets toned down, if Eldegoss healing, like, yeah, that's the thing. Like, even if you have an Eldegoss on your team with Mr. Mime, well, Mr. Mime would be better off being a carry to at least negate some of what Eldegoss is doing. And if Eldegoss is on the opponent's team, that means there's, like, one less damage thing hurting Mr. Mime. So it just kind of, like, makes the fights more noodly with Mr. Mime versus an Eldegoss, but Mr. Mime isn't able to do anything about it. It's like, oh, you get a little bit of a knock-up, and then you get a little bit of a stun, and a little bit of a push, and a little bit of damage. Well, Eldegoss is just completely negating all that, even though you're doing the way higher skilled play if you're actually, like, landing all those abilities and doing really cool things. So I think Mr. Mime can get negated too easily, and that's why it doesn't really feel that great, and then absolute damage is insane, and all the other Pokemon run around, then Machamp ults, and it can do crazy things. So yeah, it's like, I think Mr. Mime, if it was just like bumped up just a little bit and the rest of the roster was kind of tuned down, like I was talking about my tier list in my top 5 nerf video, then yeah, we have like everything being viable in the game, which is pretty cool. And that's kind of my thoughts about Pokemon Unite. Like, as it is right now, you can pick anything and have fun. Like, I don't think anyone is hard trolling, except for maybe Jungle Gengar. Like, you come out of that gank, and you're just going to be worse than a Lucario or an Absol or even like a Fletch. Like, it's just the worst gank to get from the jungle. Like, Gengar needs those levels to scale, but it's just so little damage coming out of the jungle. I guess it is better than like a Charmeleon, but I mean, that's even more grief if you're going like Jungle Charmander, Charizard, whatever. So yeah, it's like, yeah, I'm kind of disappointed when I see a few things, but overall, it's like Gengar isn't a complete int. It can maybe turn the game in some kind of way later on, and it's going to have some kind of usefulness if played by a good player. Like, if all the Pokemon in the game are being played well, there's really no massive problems here, except for maybe the ones that are too strong, like Pikachu and some other things. Yeah, I think that's kind of it. I think Pokemon Unite's in a really good spot, and I honestly prefer a game where everything feels broken than everything feels very underwhelming, and we're in like a reverse power creep state, and then like the 1 or 2 things that are allowed to be broken are just too abusive and make the game completely unfun for everyone but them. I don't like that. So I like where Pokemon Unite is. I don't really want too heavy-handed nerfs unless you're Pikachu or Crustle, and I think that the buffs need to be done very carefully to not turn them into something too crazy, because everything is just kind of in a nice little sweet spot, and then Pokemon Unite's just going to be feeling good. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.